All right, good afternoon and welcome to a creation seminar. And this is our Sunday at 2 mini series, I guess we could call it. Just going to get right into this thing. The last couple of weeks, I guess it was for sure 2 ago, and then a little bit last week, we covered some space topics. So we're going to get down to earth on this one. But anyway, I appreciate everybody being able to join us, even if they're watching it later. If you have the ability and you can and you want to, do a watch party. Get your friends involved here also if you can. And as we get started, though, I want to do like I always do, typically anyway. I want to just remind everybody that the YouTube channel that we have, encourage people to go to the YouTube channel. We need some subscribers. We want some subscribers anyway, and want to see that thing grow as best we can. So if you can be a help there, we certainly appreciate it. But also want to remind you that we have 12 lessons. The actual series is 12 lessons. They're all basically about 2 hours long, and we cover a lot of information. A lot of information that is covered there. Even if we were to do these live nuggets, or whatever you want to call these live teachings, even if we do it for 2 or 3 years, there's still some things in the series that I won't say on this kind of a platform. So there's a lot more information available in those series. So be sure and stop and check that out if you can. And like I always like to start, John 17:17, thy word is truth. Folks, the Bible is truth. No matter what it says what it says for a reason. And I know we know that, I know we understand that, but boy, if it could just become revelation, a lot of things can change. It just does. But anyway, let's get going on this. Today we're going to look at the mechanism of the flood of Noah's days versus the evolutionary thinking that is being perpetrated across our country, well, really across the whole earth, but evolutionists have a grip on the education system. And I don't mean just necessarily schools and universities, but just even the fun stuff, museums and national parks and state parks and, Discovery Channel and just media, magazines, and just kind of pretty much everything. And so what they present, it's always reinforced all over the place because everybody keeps saying the same thing. So people grow up at a very young age and they end up believing that what they're hearing is true because they keep hearing it. And so let's take a look at some of the amazing stuff. We're going to look at a little bit about Palo Duro Canyon today in Texas, in the Texas Panhandle. There are about 700 feet of strata that's actually visible there. And some amazing stuff is known about that place. For instance, there's one layer there, the Ogallala layer, that is 174 square miles. It actually crosses 8 states. Now I'm going to show some pictures of Palo Duro Canyon, some of the Grand Canyon, and some other places, and realize these layers are nice, neatly stacked on top of each other. And I know I've mentioned this before, but I want to stress it again because we do have new viewers. These layers, oftentimes, like the slide I just showed says 174,000 square miles, and it covers 8 states. But oftentimes, some of these layers, they travel across entire continents. And that's a very, very important point. A picture is a picture. It may be, 100 feet wide. It may be 10 feet wide. It may be 100 yards wide. It may be 10 miles wide. But it's still just a photo. It's still a snapshot in time. But when you realize we're talking thousands of miles, oftentimes, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles in all directions, the same layer exists there, you start to realize that's big, and you'll understand why here in just a minute in a big way. But notice these layers again. They're nice, neatly stacked on top of each other. Okay, this is what is so fascinating and amazing to me. Give you an example of something. Evolution. Now, I'm just going to throw some numbers out. This is not what they say specifically. I'm just going to throw some numbers out. But let's say the layers you're looking at there in the picture, in the scene there. Let's say the bottom layer is 410 million years old, and then let's say that and you've seen this kind of thing. We'll show you here in a minute what it actually is. But then the layer above it is 407 million years old. These time frames that they give, obviously. And the layer above that is 380 million years old. And above that is 320. And above that is 210. And above that is 186. And, they have these layers all laid out in millions of years of time frame depicted. And what's interesting is notice how nice, neatly stacked on top of each other they are. Typically, for the most part, they are that way. They're nice and smooth and flat. Now, I would have a question for evolutionists. What in the world happened not on a 10-foot wide picture, but not on a 10-mile wide picture, but across entire continents? What happened to take everything that was alive or whatever in that time frame and just wipe it off smoothly? Where's all the stuff? How come all those layers are nice like a bulldozer just went through and wiped it off completely smooth? And then what is the mechanism to bring another layer on top of that and let things live there? Plants are growing and animals are living and growing and multiplying, and all this stuff is happening, and life takes on. And then what's the mechanism to wipe all that stuff off flat? And then what's the mechanism to bring another something on? See, the issue, and where did all that dirt come from? Where did all that something come from that's now turned to rock? See, the problem is we see the pictures and they state their time scale, but they don't really explain how and why it happened and how it happened and all that. So just bear all these things in mind. See, God, in my mind, God left his evidence absolutely everywhere. He left his fingerprints everywhere. And to an evolutionist, they must come up with some kind of an alternative explanation to something that the Bible says, because, as we've seen in previous lessons, they come up with their ideas because it is a contradiction to what the Bible says. They want to have everything happen. They need to have everything happen on a purely naturalistic scale. And that just creates an enormous amount of problems, because thy word is truth. There really is God, and he is who he says he is, and he did what he said he did. So when people are looking at his evidence but not accepting him, then they have to come up with some kind of alternative explanation. So let's see what some of the stuff they come up with. Now, Science News wrote this article about, they're talking about the Grand Canyon, and look at what it says here. It's really amazing. It says, for all its glorious views, the Colorado Plateau remains an ugly mystery to geologists. They can't figure out why and how it rose thousands of feet over the millions of years it took to carve the spectacular wonders like the Grand Canyon and Monument Valley. Now just look at this. This is their article, okay? It's a few years back, but nevertheless, nothing's changed out there. It's the Grand Canyon or the Monument Valley. But notice here, for all its glorious views, the Colorado Plateau remains an ugly mystery to geologists. They can't figure out what happened here. Okay, when I look at the Grand Canyon, I see absolute evidence of Noah's flood, the flood of Noah's day. And I see evidence that all this stuff was laid out and something really big happened on a grand scale. But my question is this an ugly mystery? Is this an ugly mystery, or is it a beautiful testimony? I see it as a beautiful testimony to what God said he did. And again, remember this. This is so very important. All of the Bible was written by people that were never over in North America that anybody knows about. Okay, there's no recorded history of that. All of the Bible was written by people that were never here. But what they wrote about over there that said it was everywhere on earth, we have the evidence over here. Now that to me is really powerful evidence. Now the problem is evolutionists have to look at the evidence and come up with an alternative explanation. I'll give you a silly analogy. If you walk in the kitchen and there's just like, I don't know, 2 or 3 eggshells are laying up there on the table cracked open. Okay, you see the thing. Now, if I have a note right here that said, hey, Mom, by the way, I was really hungry, so I took the last 3 eggs and I made myself an omelet, and just left the shells out there. At least now you've got the information by the person who did it, and you've got the evidence that shows he did it. But if somebody walks in, you don't see a note, there's nobody said anything, you just see broken eggs. Well, you could come up with all kinds of explanations and examples of what it might have been, could have been, should have been. Don't know if it was, could have been, I don't know, maybe. But there's no way to know that. But the beauty is, the Bible written thousands of years ago, still what it says, you could still find the eggshells today. It's still there. The evidence is there, what was written thousands of years ago. Powerful evidence. But let's go back to this article a minute. For all its glorious views, the Colorado Plateau remains an ugly mystery. It's amazing to geologists. They can't figure out why and how it rose over the thousands of years, millions of years it took to create these spectacular views of Monument Valley. We've been to the Grand Canyon many times, been to Monument Valley many times. This is beautiful. This is a picture right outside the windshield of our motorhome going down the road. I mean, it's just beautiful when you stop and realize what it is and what it represents. But I see absolute concrete evidence of the flood that the Bible talks about. Massive amount of water. And when you're there and you see it for the first time or for the 19th time, it doesn't really matter, but you see it in person, you just get a sense of the awesome vastness of this and what a serious event that was that would have carved this kind of thing. But my question again is this an ugly mystery, or is it a beautiful testimony? I see it as a beautiful testimony to what God says. The evidence is just absolutely out there. Now, let's see how it happened. All right, Genesis chapter 7. Okay, 6, 7, and 8 is where the flood account is going to take place, where God tells Noah to build a boat, and then it floods, and then the waters recede, and then he gets off the ark in chapter 9. All right, in chapter 7, starting verse 10, it says, "And it came to pass, and after 7 days, that the waters of the flood were upon the earth, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights." Okay, look at it again. It says, in the 600th year of Noah's life. All right, the same day, all. Now, again, I know I covered this a little bit the other day when we talked about Noah's flood and the ark and such, but I'm talking about geology features here. Realize something. The same day, folks, all. Absolutely everywhere, all over Earth, the fountains of the great deep are breaking up. This stuff is coming up. It's scalding hot. It's volcanic. It's liquid. It's water. It's all steam. It's minerals. This stuff is boiling up. And the windows of heaven were open. So this stuff is coming in, this stuff is coming up. A lot of times when people think about the flood, people talk about rain, and we think of it as a rainstorm, but there was rain, no question about it, but also there was stuff coming up from the bottom. And then in verse 24 it says, "The waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days." Now I want you to keep these time elements in mind, because this actually gets really interesting. All right, it was 150 days. Okay, and then it goes on in chapter 7, talking about everything died and such, except what was on the ark. And then chapter 8, it says, "And God remembered Noah and every living thing that was, and the cattle that was with him in the ark. God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained." Okay, let's look at this. Here's another translation. God did not forget about Noah. God remembered him and all the animals that were with him in the boat. God made a wind to blow over the earth, and all the waters, notice, began to disappear. All right? The rain stopped falling from the sky. The water stopped flowing from under the earth. That's the ERV. The CEV says it this way. God did not forget about Noah and the animals that were with him in the boat. God made a wind to blow over, and the water started going down. Notice again, God stopped up the place where the water had been gushing out from under the earth. He also closed up the sky, and the rain stopped. Okay, now this is really kind of crucial. All right, the Bible talks about how the waters assuaged. Okay, the fact is the waters assuaged. The assuage means to lower, to sink down. Here it is, just a picture taken right out of a Bible. But also then notice in verse number 3, it says the waters returned from off the earth continually. Now this is really interesting, because I'm going to show you the definition of these words here. But returned continually. Just think about those two words. The waters returned continually. They were going and returning. They were continuing to go. Okay. Now here's what it says. Let's just copy right out of the King James with the Strong's numbers attached to them. I'm going to show you these definitions of these words. The waters returned from off the earth continually. The word continually. We'll start with that one. It's the Hebrew. The number here that is 1980, and it says to walk in a great variety of applications, literally or figuratively, all along a space, behave, self, come on, continually, be conversant. It goes on and on. Notice as it nears the end here, the definitions of all the various definitions of the word, but it means to walk or go along a way, forward, on, forward, up and out, up and down, travel, traveler, walk abroad, walk on, to and fro, up and down. Notice the context, and it goes on, by the way, but let's look at this other word for a minute. Returned, notice, and continually. Continually, there are two words there that make up that word. One is the one we just saw. The other is the number here is 7725, the word shub. But notice here is the same word as is used for the word returned. It's the same word. And look what it says, to turn back, hence away. Transitively, intransitively, literally or figuratively. This is key. Not necessarily with the idea of return to the starting point. Very crucial. Keep that in mind. Generally to retreat, often adverbially again. And the definition goes on. It's very, very lengthy. But anyway, I just wanted to highlight some more of the evidence, because the word again, to answer again, to cause again, to bring again, back home again, to carry again, to be mindful again, to come again back. And it's talking about again, to give again, to come back home. Okay, but not necessarily to the starting point. Okay, keep all these ideas in mind. Keep all these definitions in mind for just a bit. But let's go back to the Bible and look what it says again. The waters returned from off the earth continually, but not to the same place. Okay, just keep these in mind. And the ark rested the 7th month on the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat. The waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. Okay, the Bible does an amazing job of being very specific but very broad an overview of the situation that was taking place. This earth is flooded with water. Rain 40 days and 40 nights. The water was on this earth 150 days, and it was going and returning. It was but not back to the same place. All right, just keep these thoughts in mind for just a bit, and what we just talked about. And we'll look at some real life situations here. But it also says, thou coverest it with the deep, and I know I use this verse a lot. Psalm 104 is an overview of everything. And in Psalm 104, starting verse 6, it says, thou coverest it with the deep as with a garment. The water stood above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. At the voice of thy thunder they hasted away. They go up by the mountains, they go down by the valleys, unto the place which thou hast founded for them. And he set a bound that it may not flood again. Now, here it is once again, just shot right out of a Bible. Notice, thou coverest it with the deep as with a garment. The water stood above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. God had something to say. At the voice of thy thunder they hasted away. They go up by the mountains, they go down by the valleys. Notice the translation, the footnote translation over there. The mountains rise up and the valleys sink down. Now, some translations will even say it that way, where the Bible says they go up by the mountains, they go down by the valleys. Some translations will word it with that definition, but more in mind. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place you appointed for them. Okay, God made a low spot for this stuff. He made the high spot for this. This is really important. All right, today there is always enough land showing to stop the water. Now, I want you to think about high tide. You could go to a beach at high tide. You can go to a beach at low tide. And as high tide starts to slowly come in, notice what happens. The water, there's always enough land to stop the high tide. And high tide will come on in, and next thing you know, what used to be underwater is now dry land again when the low tide is working its way back in. Okay, so high tide comes in, the water comes up. There's always enough land to stop the water. Always. You can even at a hurricane or a tsunami, the water comes way in, sometimes miles. But it's still, there could be a hurricane hit the Gulf Coast of Texas today, and it's not going to wipe out Kansas. There's always enough land showing to stop the water. Okay, but at the time of Noah's flood, there was no land showing to stop the water. I just read it. The Bible says that everything under the whole heaven was underwater. Everything was underwater. Now, if there is no land showing to stop the water, but the high tide, we'll say, is still coming in, it's going to just keep rolling. And the whole time, that whole 150 days time frame, plus starting at the 40 days and 40 nights where it was rain, but then the whole 150 days where this is going on, this water is racing around and lifting and settling, and high tide, low tide, high tide, low tide, high tide, low tide, lifting and settling, going high tide, low tide, around and around this entire time. With no land showing to stop it, it is continuing to travel across. This is extremely important because today, there's land showing to stop, but back in those days, there was no land showing. So all of this thing that was taking place is taking place continually, high tide, low tide, the whole time the flood is taking place. Now, I want you to look at a map of where the mountain chains are. You know, the mountain chains typically follow the coastlines. Now, they're inward also, but they typically follow the coastlines. Okay, but also notice the deep valleys and trenches, and also the mountain ridges under the water, but the deep valleys and trenches, the low spot. Do you notice where the mountains are and where the deep valleys are in the oceans, okay? And guess where the volcanoes typically are? They're typically found along the mountain ridge chains and along those deep valleys out in the oceans. Well, guess where earthquakes typically start and take place? They follow the mountain chains. They follow the deep valleys that are out in the ocean. Now think about, the Bible says here that everything, thou coverest it with the deep as with a garment. The water stood above the mountain. Everything is, even the mountains are covered. At thy rebuke they fled. At the voice of thy thunder they hasted away. God had something to say. This stuff races off. when the mountains rose and the valleys sank down. So the Bible says that the earth is cracked up. It's busted up at that point. Mountains, can you imagine the tumultuous event, the drastic nature of that? Mountains rising and the valleys are sinking down, okay? And this stuff is going into the place which thou hast founded for them. Today, you could see these layers are nice, neatly stacked right on top of each other for the most part. They're nice, neatly stacked. Now, again, this is a picture. This is a picture of, maybe 100 feet wide over here, this one portion. Not even that much, 80 feet wide. But remember again, this stuff oftentimes, it covers entire continents, these layers. And what's the mechanism to wipe it all off? Where'd all the stuff go? What's the mechanism to bring another one on? What brought that on? What's the mechanism to wipe that one off? What's the mechanism to bring some more stuff on? See, they don't have any of those explanations. But the Bible describes this flood is taking place over a long period of time. A full year is going on, and all this stuff is racing around and around, and it is sorting out everything that it's carrying with it. We do experiments when we have our meetings at churches, and we take a jar of dirt, get a jar of dirt, have a bunch of people bring in dirt, we fill up the jar, and we put the water in it and flood it, we stir it just with a wood handle spoon is basically what it amounts to. And I'm not stirring it for 150 days. I'm not stirring it for a year. I'm not stirring it for 40 days and 40 nights. No, just for about a couple of minutes. And then I'll just stop, and that thing will settle out into nice, neatly stacked layers all the time. Now, sometimes it's 6 layers, sometimes 7, sometimes 9. Sometimes there's a little bit of a gap where a layer isn't there, and all kinds of features form in a jar on a table while we're doing a meeting within 1 hour. And people are watching it form right before their eyes. It is a fascinating depiction of what took place on a small scale, what took place on a large scale. And it's amazing because when you then look out at this earth and you look at the strata layers, I see the Grand Canyon. I see a big flood. Man, this stuff is laid off. It's just all laid out. It was obviously laid flat with one layer after the other, where these waters are racing around and around and around. And when the mountains rose, the valleys sink down, the washout that'll wash that thing out, you can form that with a 5-gallon bucket of water in a bunch of sand area, dirt when you're in your yard. Just take a big 5-gallon bucket of water and rake out the dirt nice and toss that water in there, and boosh, it'll wash something out like that in seconds. But on a massive earth-wide scale, you'd get those kind of features. But those layers are always nice, neatly stacked. But yet, how can they be that way if evolution is the way it happened? Folks, the point is, what the Bible says, we've got the evidence for it, no matter what the topic is. And all this is important because there's a law in science called the law of superposition. And all of our students are being taught it. Every one of us have been taught it. If you went to school, hopefully you might have forgot it. Not hopefully, I like science. Science is fun stuff. Doing our experiment, that's science. But a lot of the stuff is just not science. But the point is, I'm not saying this law is not science. I'm just simply saying all of evolution is not science. But the law of superposition is basically a law in science, they say, that the bottom layers are the oldest and the top layers are the youngest. Okay, that's true. That's good science, because even in our jar, when we stir this thing around, the layers are laying out, the bottom one's on the bottom and the top one's on the top. The top one may settle out a little later. Okay. But how much time did it take to do it? See, is it really millions and millions of years, hundreds of millions of years, or is it really just a matter of 1 year with all this stuff going on and on? Just like, is it really, several weeks or months to do the jar that we do, or is it really just 1 hour? See, the oldest layers, that's not a problem to say the older ones are at the bottom, typically, and the younger ones are at the top. But again, like this textbook shows, sometimes there's a gap, sometimes there's an incline. There you have unconformities, nonconformities, disconformities, all that stuff. That happens in our jar, sitting right on the table every time. But to say the youngest ones are at the top and the older ones are at the bottom, that's not a problem. The problem is, it's the time. What kind of time are we really looking at? And people say, well, you're just believing the Bible. Well, they just believe it was 412 million years. Nobody was here 400 million years ago to see any of this happen. It is purely a belief system. There was no such thing as 400 plus million years ago. Everything was only a few thousand years old, and everything started back then, I should say, and everything is only a few thousand years old. What's interesting is I have many pictures of this kind of thing. This happens to be the Permian. Everywhere that you see the black, the strata is gone. Here's I got the Triassic, the Jurassic, I got a slide for every one of these periods. And on any one slide where you see the black showing, it's missing there on that portion of the earth. Wait a minute. Again, what's the mechanism then? Where was most of the earth during the Triassic period? How come the dirt's not there? From a biblical perspective, and the flood is taking place, I'll just explain that. That happens in the jar, what we do. But they also have all kinds of varying times on this stuff. I mean, even the Grand Canyon. I've got slides. I've got countless slides, hundreds of them, talking about the timing of the Grand Canyon. It's everything from 750,000 years it takes to make the Grand Canyon, all the way to 2 billion, and everything you can imagine in between. Dead Horse Point, some slides say 240 million years, some say 300 million years. All kinds of varying discrepancies on the thing. How long did it take? What is the time there? They have all kinds of different discrepancies of times depicted about this thing. Hundreds of times. No two will say the same thing. But yet the Bible still says the exact same thing it said thousands of years ago, which is pretty powerful evidence. Back to Palo Duro Canyon real quick, wrapping this thing up, but there's 700 feet of strata. All those layers, nice, neatly stacked on top of each other. But a sign in the visitor center of Palo Duro Canyon says an amazing thing. It says more than 200 million years of geologic record between the Mild-Pliocene and the Triassic Age are not present in the rock formations of Palo Duro Canyon. Well, I would have a question. Where was all of North Texas for the supposed 200 million years of time? Now, they try to explain it. Look at the paragraph below. Next, during the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, a large sea covered much of North America. Okay, and then the hillsides eroded away. Okay, wait. They can say that. But I've got a question. Where did the sea come from? Where did the sea go? Why did the sea go? Why was it there in the first place? What happened to it? See, the point is, I got an explanation for that. The Bible explains that. They'll say, well, that's only a belief system. That sign right there is only a belief system. See, what they have is a belief system. Again, they see a bunch of eggshells. They got to come up with some kind of story because we got to come up with something. But we've got the note about what, how, and why they got there. And so the point is, folks, what the Bible says, written by people that were never here, what they said happened all over the earth. The evidence is even all the way over here. It's amazing. But they're in Palo Duro Canyon, there are 40 million years of gaps. There are 4 to 10 million years of gaps. There are 10 million years of gaps. There are 200 million years of gaps. All kinds of gaps exist there. The Bible says, he that formeth the mountain, the Lord, the God of hosts is his name. God's the one that put this stuff here. The Bible says, and God said something, that the voice of thy thunder they hasted away. God had something to say, and this stuff did what it did. And we've got the evidence to confirm that it's true. And also, one last thing, not always are those layers nice, neatly stacked horizontally. Sometimes they're highly disturbed and twisted, but still nice, neatly stacked. And the textbooks will say the folding of these rocks. Well, you don't fold rocks. If you try to fold rocks, they're going to break. I mean, it's just the way it goes. But you know what? You could fold a whole bunch of soft sediment. You could fold soft sediment. Now, the Bible says that everything's underwater. Thou coverest it with the deep as with a garment. The water stood above the mountains. Everything is underwater. At the voice of thy thunder, they hasted away. I mean, this stuff, the mountains rose, the valley sank down. You know what? While this stuff is soft and wet and pliable and moldable and foldable and bendable because it's still underwater, that is when it rose in places, and that's when it sank down in places, so you would expect to find bent, twisted layers. This is obvious to me. This is laid out, and it rose while it was still soft and wet and pliable and moldable and foldable and bendable. Evolutionists say, no, it's hundreds of millions of years of continents slamming into each other, piling this up. Man, that would break them and crack them and annihilate these things. It's not going to fold them. You could fold soft sediment and turn to stone later. See, once again, we are the ones with the evidence on our side based on what the Bible says actually happened. Yes, some are nice layered out flat. Some of them are to go for miles and miles, in fact, cover entire continents. And sometimes then those same layers will be folded in some places. All of this stuff obviously was laid out in one event. Now, as we wrap it up, I want to do this. We had a question come in, and if anybody has a question, I want you to write us, call us, text us, do whatever. But 10-year-old Natalie from Tupelo, Mississippi, she asked a question, and she wanted to know an answer to something. And her question is, how did they grow crops with no rain? Talking about the original creation. Now, there's several things about this question. Number one, I love it. That's a 10-year-old. Because that tells me that a 10-year-old child, now this is very important, it's something I've talked about all these lessons in some degree or another. We got a 10-year-old girl, a 10-year-old child here that wants some answers. that wants an answer. She's believing the Bible. She understands the Bible. She knows her Bible. She reads it and such, and the family does. But then these questions, okay, so then if it didn't rain, how did they grow crops? That's a valid question. See, one of the problems is a lot of times people have questions and they never address them. And so next thing you know, years go by and more questions compile on and, get compounded onto the thing, and we got a problem. So I appreciate the question. I love the question. It's a good question. It tells me that this person is a thinker, and that's what we need. People that are willing to think and know and learn. So that's awesome. But how did the crops grow with no rain? All right. First of all, real quick, it's just going to take me 1 minute. The Bible does say in Genesis 2 that God caused it not to rain on the earth. That's true. But then the next verse, it does say, but there went a mist that came up from the earth and watered the face of the whole face of the ground. God watered the ground from a mist that came up. It did not rain in the original creation. He watered the ground from a mist that came up. And so the point is, there was water there. Now, once again, people say, but that's a Bible. That's a belief. Okay, fine. But people believe things started growing and we crawled out of a slime pit somewhere. The point is, we all have a faith system of some sort. But we've got ample evidence on our side to prove and show that what the Bible says is really true. But there was a mist that came up that watered the ground. That's the way God told us how he did it. He watered it from a mist that came up. But I want you to understand something really neat. They have found mummified forest remains in northern Canada. Now, just let these things settle in for a second. Northern Canada, Ellesmere Island, mummified forest. In fact, several secular publications, I've got all kinds of articles about this, how they find tropic vegetation in the Arctic. They'd find stuff that should not be growing there. Okay, they find fossil leaves and from tropical plants and remains of cold-blooded crocodile-like reptiles have been found in the Arctic. I've got tons of this stuff, many, many, many articles. The Bible says that everything was a very good creation. In that original creation, there was no rain, which means everything temperature-wise had to be even, less than 10 degrees of change. Axel Heiberg Island, Canada's seventh largest island, way up in the in the Arctic, in the northern Canada region, they have found stumps, logs, seeds, leaves, and such. Some of them so well preserved it's hard to distinguish from present day stuff. They've found sycamore, evidence of sycamore trees, and Chinese water chestnut, and spruce, and pine, and dawn redwoods, and such. Some of these massive logs, the rings, they say, they look so modern. They look like it's a freshly logged forest. Some of the stuff, they wonder, how did it all survive up there? Some of the wood, they say, is so well preserved you can saw it, you can burn it. Now, I want you to realize something. The Bible says everything was a tropical vegetation. It was a tropical environment. Everything was the same temperature because it didn't rain. It only takes about 10 degrees of temperature change. But God says he watered the ground from a mist that came up. And do you know that evidence all over this earth, even under ice in the Arctic region, is still evident that what the Bible says is true is true. So I love that question. That is an awesome question, and there's so much more to this topic, but hopefully that answered that question well enough. But it was watered by a mist that came up. So, in fact, check out Axel Heiberg Island. That's a fascinating thing. But anyway, if you have an idea or you have a question, be sure and send it in and ask me, or text or call or whatever. But the bottom line is, folks, they really don't have a clue. They don't have a clue about a lot of stuff that they teach. They just have a whole lot of ideas. But the Bible does say, forever, O Lord, thy word is settled in heaven. And it most assuredly is. Anyway, as we wrap it up, I'll have my wife crawl in here again or sneak in, slide in, and just mention a couple things with you, and we're going to wrap it up.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope a lot of you were able to actually go to church today. I know in many states they did, and that's great. We want to remind you to invest in the Creation series. There is just so much information there, and if you're enjoying these lessons, I know that you will enjoy the series. And we also have our new project, the T-shirts, and hope that you will check out our T-shirts. They're Get America Great Again shirts. And thank you for your love, your support, and your prayers. And share this video
with everybody you know.
Right, and do Facebook Lives. We appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Help us get the word out.
And don't forget these T-shirts. We're getting some great results from them and with them, and testimonies about them and such. So we need to get this country great again. That's for sure. Support the country and support the just whatever's going on. I mean, finally this everything's getting back up and running, and which is an awesome thing. It needs to be. And many of you have been out of jobs. We've been out of a job, so to speak. I mean, all of our meetings canceled.
Right. That's why we're depending on you guys to support us.
Yeah. So the bottom line is things are going to be up and running again. So we appreciate everybody. Appreciate you giving us some of your time here. Watch party, spread the word, let some folks know. We want to do what we can on our little way. So we'll see you Tuesday at 7 o'clock in the evening. We have Walk in Faith meeting coming up again, a lesson coming up, having great responses to those also. And so invite some people to watch it with you. It's going to be fun. We're going to have a good time.
And you can call us at 603-616-8907. Call or text your question. And thank you, Natalie from Tupelo. Great question.
Great question. We'll see you. Thank you.
Bye.